And welcome to the React Show. I'm Thomas with my co host Austin. Hi, Austin. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're with Owl Creek, a high performance React consultancy. And yeah, I think we have a really fantastic show today. We're going to talk about ethics in programming and sort of why I think that's really important for programmers to think about, and also like how you can go about thinking about it, developing a framework for it, and that type of thing. So yeah, I know it's a little bit different than talking about the next upcoming features for React 9,000 or something, but like I think it's really important, and I think we can still have a lot of fun with it. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. If you have any feedback or questions, send them to the React Show at owlcreek.studio. A little email, say hi, that works too. We're happy to hear from you. And I thought I would mention, I don't think we've mentioned this before, but we actually record all of these shows live straight to YouTube. So if you're the type of person that wants to watch it live and interact with us live, we're happy to respond as we're able. Yeah, so check us out on the Owl Creek React channel. Yeah, and in other news, we've been working on upgrading Austin's audio. So, I don't want everyone to think that we don't care about Austin. What's it sound like, Austin?
Yeah, I bought this, what is it, the Yeti Blue. It's a portable one. And I mean, it was last time we recorded with it, and I had the microphone turned around backwards. It still sounded a lot better than recording through the Mac that I'm using. And now that I have it turned around the correct way, I think it sounds pretty great. And we have like I got the Mac set up. I have the mic here like properly, and it's making me sit up straight, and it's great. So I hope you guys enjoy the quality too.
Yeah, and if you're on YouTube, you'll probably still notice a difference. But we're also now recording Austin's audio separately, and he sends me that data later, and we mix it together, so it should be even better in the podcast version. Yeah, so we're excited about that. Happy to hear any feedback there. And apparently on my list here, I mentioned that I need to get a haircut, and I tried to do that, but they wouldn't let me. They're like, we have like a 3-week wait list, and I was like, that's never happened before. So I need to go like Austin style, I think, and cut my own hair again.
Yeah, it's really easy and it's cheap. Every week I just buzz it, and then I mean the beard is the main problem because it starts, especially out on the sides, it goes a little crazy, and like having to shape it properly can be upsetting if you do it incorrectly, and then you're like, oh, all of that work and growing it out is now gone, and then you have to shamefully just like trim it down and restart again. So but it's nice taking care of yourself and saving hundreds of dollars, maybe even thousands a year, just by buying a good clipper.
Yeah,
So
actually, that's what I used to do is shave my head. I didn't really grow the beard, but I used to shave my head, and then my partner was like, you're actually losing hair on the top of your head. I would prefer if you kept it around while you still had it. And I was like, that's not a bad argument. So
yeah, if you don't have to shave your head, I really recommend not doing it. The only reason I do is because I have kind of a thing going on, and
yeah.
if I could have hair, like I would grow it long, but like be grateful for what you do have.
I keep it. I got a little bit on the front here, so it still looks like I have hair. So I guess I'll keep it for now. And then we could jump into talking about the ethics of haircuts. And oh wait, never mind. No, I didn't mean haircuts. Yeah, so we can move on probably. So yeah, the main show today is ethics and programming, and I just want to say, like, to start, why I think it's really more important for programmers than for a lot of professions, which I don't think a lot of people have thought about, and probably a lot don't care. But anyways, I'm going to talk about it. So I think the number one reason is the scale. I can write some code and, half the world could be running it very easily. Like, that's not, if you're, a woodworker building chairs, I mean, that's just not the same level of scale. It's definitely like programming is a gigantic change in terms of the scale of where our work is applied. So I think in that regard, it's really important because if you write code that does something bad or is used for some purpose that's not good, um, I mean, it's just you could have a huge effect so easily. I guess is the main point.
Yeah, on that topic, when COVID started breaking out, a guy approached me and he was like, dude, a really good idea I have is like when restaurants and businesses open up, they're gonna have to start like verifying who like has had their like who's been tested, this and that, blah blah blah. And I'm like, man, I don't want to be a part of that. Like, and he was like, dude, it's going to happen anyways. You might as well be the one
Mm. I,
who's
so
doing it.
before we get too far into that, that will fit perfect with our later discussion on the
Okay.
actual. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but
Oh,
I
no, no,
just
no.
feel like it's a really great thing to talk about when we get into like how you evaluated that and that
Yeah,
type of
sorry, I
thing.
got excited.
I know. um, we'll get to it. Don't worry. Um, yeah, but it's a really great example. Yeah, I wanted to say the other major thing for why I think it's important for programmers is just how easy it is for programs to be copied. So I could make a program once, and anybody could copy it and transform it if they get access to the source code. Again, that's not the way it works in most industries, most professions. If you're an accountant or whatever doing your accounting, like you can do bad things, but it's generally going to be limited to that situation. Whereas with programming, it's a different ball game.
Well, it's not only like a different ball game, it's like it is the ball game. That's how like every company online right now is like, hey, how can we copy and improve like upon what others are doing? So yeah, these ethical implications through the copying can really fractal out like rapidly, which is a huge implication.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I did want to say too, like Austin already touched on this, is you'll get the argument like, oh, it's gonna happen or whatever. And that's like, I don't know, to me that's like a cop out. It's like, compromising your own morals and ethics for no benefit. Like that's I don't see a benefit to it. And I think the situation you'll often run into is, at work, your boss or manager or whatever is going to give you something to do that maybe you think you shouldn't or whatever. The truth is, those people aren't going to do it. So if we don't do it as programmers, it ain't going to happen. Of course, I know it's a lot more complicated on like a societal level and stuff, but you have to start somewhere, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the touching on that, it's like I think the main thing is it's like unless like everyone refuses to do it, like there is someone who won't refuse to do it. So it's like, is it better to be the one who does it if it's even unethical to make sure that it can be molded ethically as possible if it's going to happen anyways? Or like, is that too damaging for one's own personal self to take on that responsibility? It's a really, really difficult situation because the reality of human nature. I mean, look back just like 100 years ago, like the atrocities that have happened within like a century. It's like humanity is capable of terrible things and it doesn't mind doing them. So it's like it's a really sticky situation, and hopefully a podcast like this and this topic and this discussion, at least we can begin like talking about it and helping people think about it. And I think that's the beginning of any cause like becoming more than just like an idea, like in becoming something is like having more people talk about it. So
Yeah.
hopefully that will have some good ripples from this discussion today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That was well said. Yeah, so I think now we can move into the actual like ethical framework and how you can go about making decisions like this. And I want to say, just as like a side note, like we might talk somewhat about our own, framework, but that's not, we understand that everyone has different, views and perspectives on things. And we're not trying to say anyone should necessarily have the same opinions as us or ethics in the sense. We're trying to focus on the ethical framework and how you go about utilizing it as a programmer. Um, if we wanted to have a discussion about the actual ethics, that we might have on a personal level, I think maybe we could do that sometime. I don't know, but this was focused on more of like the framework, how you go about evaluating these situations and what you do about it. Um, yeah, so I was going to start with like sort of an example that I had thought up, and Austin has already talked about an example that he's been thinking about, and so we can go through that and talk about like how to evaluate the situation based on our ethical framework. So to me, like respecting users or people and their freedoms and their lives and who they are as people is a very important thing. So like that's a part of my ethical framework, is I want to respect the users of my software. And I also want to do something that I think makes society better or whatever. Obviously, like I don't want to be writing software that is, causing destruction to the world or to society. That's not part of my ethics. So within that ethical framework, I'll talk about this example, which is like, let's say someone came to me and said, "Hey, will you make some license plate reader software for a toll booth?" Because the toll booth wants to, just take tolls by reading people's license plates, looking up the address, and sending them a bill afterwards, so they don't get big backups, at the toll booth, and everyone can just breeze through. And at first you're like, okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable, right? Like, yeah, it saves time and whatever. But then what I do is I get into basically two different sets of questions that I either ask myself or ask people, and that would be, you know, users data and then the software itself. And so we can start with like what I talk about for users data. So in that situation, before I even like would look at the software, I would say, all right, so what kind of things are we doing to make sure the user is protected and the user's data is protected? Like, do all the employees at the toll booth have access to this data? What if one of them is stalking an ex-girlfriend? Can they just log into the computer and see when the ex-girlfriend's been going through the toll booth, assuming they've been going into town? Like, that's, to me, I think maybe if they're like, oh yeah, anybody can do it. I don't know if I would say absolutely, okay, I'm not doing the project anymore, but I would be like, yeah, that's kind of sketchy. Like, I don't know if I would want to work on something like that. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts so far, Austin?
Well, it makes me think about Uber. I'm pretty sure that when Uber first started up, they had a really toxic culture about around the employee access to data, and they were like keeping track of like who was going to hook up with who, and like all the
Mm-hmm.
stories of like certain people who were like getting in the rides when they were just starting up, and like all this really messed up, even like blackmail-esque level stuff that they had on like popular celebrities or figures in the area where they were beta testing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
some before we even get into like user data, like the implication of even like should something even be made, like toll booth license plate readers, like should toll booths even exist? Like I pay out the ass already in taxes, right? And then you're like billing me even more, and the road systems in our country are a fucking joke. Sorry for the drop of that bomb there, but like man, like it's like should that even be created? I don't know. Like sorry about that. I just the thought of being taxed extra makes me really mad.
Yeah, so
Apologies.
I think yeah, we will. I was going to talk about the software at some point. Maybe that
Well,
should have
it's a
been
good thing
first.
you have my recording. You can bleep me out, right?
Yeah. um, yeah. Anyway, so
Well,
I,
don't do a bleep, do like a quack noise or something funny. That'd be great.
yeah, we could do that probably. Yeah.
But yeah,
So
back to employee access. Sorry.
yeah, no, it's fine. Maybe I should have changed the order on these, but yeah. So we'll definitely get to the software part. Don't worry, and whether or not it should exist, we'll get there. Um, but like, yeah. So when we're talking about like employee access, and you brought up the Uber thing and everything, that's actually I think a really great point because that is a like a situation where as a programmer, you might not think you have any power, but you actually could. So if you were the one that was like implementing some of those features early on, and you were like, hey, I don't know about everyone having access to this. Can we just like add like a level of permissions here? That might actually work. They might say, oh yeah, that's a good point. And then you have massively changed the you know way things move forward in a positive way. Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm not going to do it because of this. There might be other ways around it as well that fix the situation. Now, you're talking about like a toxic work environment or whatever. That might not happen. You might not want to be there. But I'm just saying in general, like a lot of people are pretty reasonable, and you can definitely work with them if you find things that you're concerned about.
Yeah, that kind of goes into what I jumped ahead on with like the whole COVID tracking thing. Like, man, I know this is going to be created anyways. Like, someone is gonna jump on. If I'm not thinking about it right now, and this guy is, there's someone else, and there's probably a team already jumping on it. And it's like where is the line of like taking on responsibility to like create a better society and like make sure that the ripples we create as developers are positively impactful? Where is the line between that and like your own personal responsibility to yourself? And it's a really, it's a, I feel like we could debate this forever, you
Yeah,
know?
I think that's usually called like the harm reduction tactic. Basically, like
Mm.
sort of admitting defeat to some degree, but then being like, I can do something to make it less bad. And there's definitely a place for that. And I think at least what I'm hoping we do by walking through these situations and talking about this is people are more able to think through that more clearly. Like, okay, is this a case where it makes more sense to do harm reduction, or is this a case where I just need to say no or whatever? Like, I don't know that we have any answers for these things, but at least we can start providing a process and a framework to think about it.
Well, I think the main thing is like humanity just needs to start thinking a little more long term with everything that happens. Like technology in general. Like no one had the assumption that like the social media would have such a detrimental impact on like children that are growing up now, that are like babies literally on like iPads and stuff. Like no one thought that would happen, but like it wouldn't have taken too much thought to be like what would happen like once these like technology is normalized in our society. Like what does that look like when a baby is interacting with it, right? And it's like, is that a good thing? And we like,
Hmm.
humanity seems to operate on a like it's already too late or it's almost too late before we do anything about anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, that's why this framework is so important to like have like that as part of like, hey, we need to think long term with everything we're doing, because like we're only here for maybe 100 years, but like what we're making, it may seem like trivial at the time, but like it could truly alter the course of history, especially with how we are talking about scalability, duplicability, etc. Of
Hmm.
software in general.
Yeah, yeah, and I was looking at talking about that near the end in a wider sense of the society we live in is definitely geared towards us, making everything about the short term, and so that definitely runs contrary to worrying about ethics, so it's definitely something you're going to run into.
Well, it may be something that we talk about at the end, but like when you're talking about the looking at user data collection, for example, with employees, data leaks, the metadata, historical third party connections, it's like these things are, it's like huge to think about from the very beginning, like, because like these things fractal out really quickly and can lead to some bad places. Like for example, I think there was this girl, her like father found out she was pregnant before she knew she was pregnant because like Target
Mm.
sent
Hmm.
her some sort of like thing, because little did many people know that when credit cards and debit
Hmm.
cards had been created a long time ago, they're already storing all the data on every purchase that we make, and no one really even thought that they were doing it, because they were like, oh, we should store this. And then these companies were like, oh wow, we're sitting on a gold mine of like historical data, and like
Hmm.
how can we use this to, so it's like everything, we no one thinks about those implications up front, and then it's like, wow, like now it's just like standard practice to mine as much data out of human beings and turn them into uh like just like ATMs in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why I wanted to talk about this, because I want us to start asking those questions before we make things. Like before we make it, have a framework set up where you can evaluate whether or not you should make it. And that's I think super important. It would have been great if more people did that historically, but at least going forward, hopefully we can move towards that. And yeah, so as Austin was alluding to, the next question I usually ask is like, what happens if there are like, is there a possibility for the data to be leaked? And if it is, what would be leaked? Like, is the database encrypted? Or if there's a leak, which is gonna happen, it always happens eventually. Like, like, what can people do with that data when it's leaked? Like there's implications there. So if they're like, no, it's not encrypted, I'm like, okay, so it's probably going to be leaked. So then I'm like, what is in that data? What can be done with it? And that ties into like the metadata. What other stuff is collected? Like, are we storing a date and time, with this license plate? Like, are we like, what else are we storing with it? What is the other the data that we're going to have get leaked?
Yeah, it makes me think about Ashley Madison, that
Yeah.
site for affairs. Like so many people's lives were ruined, but and it's like, well, let's take a step back. Should that site have even been made to like have in a site that like literally erodes at the moral values of like the family unit and like societal like health by like making having affairs and cheating on your spouse like even easier like that, and like, is it, I mean, and if you sign up for a service like that and your stuff does get leaked, like that was maybe your fault to begin with,
I don't know if I'm on board with you there, but yeah, I mean, I I think I would look at an even higher level, like, oh, there must be something fundamentally wrong with maybe that institution or something. But like,
Right.
I think when we're looking at, but it's a great point to bring up. Like maybe the site, either shouldn't exist or maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe there are people that we don't care about. that's that's perfectly fine to have those viewpoints.
Yeah, that's what makes me like hang my head and be like, I don't know anymore.
Well, don't hang your head. We'll keep working on it here. We'll make progress, you know? Yeah. So the next question I look at is historical data. Like, how long is this data kept? Like, if it's deleted after 10 days, maybe a leak isn't the end of the world, but are you keeping this data forever? You know, that it has relevance.
Yeah, of course you're keeping it forever. Otherwise, you can't do proper marketing and trend analysis. So good luck. Like, hey, yeah, we should delete all of our data after a week. Like, what? No, you're fired.
Well, we're getting closer to the ultimate question, which we're not quite there yet. But like, then I
Right.
ask, what about third party providers? What data are you sending to other people? What are they doing with it? Are their policies ever going to change? Are your policies ever going to change? Like, there's a lot of things here where even if they gave the right answers right now, are they always going to be that answer? Like, maybe they'll stop encrypting the data in the database. They'll start keeping historical data.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure that the Buddha said, like, nothing in this life is permanent, everything is temporary. So these implications of, yeah, any connection beyond the core of like your business or like what you're making, any relationship or any connection network that you make. Yeah, that I mean, I think as we're going through all of these points, like I hope it's highlighting more and more how important like having a framework from the very beginning is super critical because of the fractaling nature, especially with software, like how one decision can then just set off this huge chain of events where it's like, oh man, that didn't see that coming.
Yeah, for sure. And this brings us to the sort of summary and what I've been leading up to, which is ownership. So, who has ownership of the data that people input and that gets generated? If a user generates that data or inputs that data, do they have ownership of it? If they don't have ownership of it, what happens to it? What can users get their data deleted? You know, can they get it changed? What if there's mistakes? Can it get fixed? Like I think there's a lot of questions, and they all revolve around this ownership question.
Yeah, and who owns all of these problems that we've talked about when they happen, right? Is it like ultimately like as the people who programmed it, like, oh well, my boss like made me do it because I'm being paid. So like I wrote the code and like I made those decisions, but it's my boss's fault because like I'm an employee. Or are we like the true owners of all of this like stuff that's happening because we maybe didn't have an ethical framework when we began?
Yeah. So this again ties into how what I was thinking about talking about at the end, but I guess we might as well just talk about it now because it seems to be pervading everything and coming up. So don't feel bad for saying anything, but like, yeah, really, I had at the end basically like caveats, which is like probably most of the people listening to this podcast live in a capitalistic society where you're a programmer that's not on top of the world. You might have a family, you might need to feed your kids. There's a lot of basically there's a power hierarchy, and you might not be at the top. And if you're not at the top, you might have to make decisions you don't want to make and shouldn't make, but are forced to make. And you might have to do stuff you don't want to do. And so I don't want to discount that reality. Like I think programmers in general can be very privileged, especially in the United States with the amount of money that they often make. And so they're maybe have more freedom than some, but it's absolutely still an issue where you are sort of forced into making decisions you don't want to.
Oh yeah, the privilege thing that makes me laugh. I was literally last night, I was sitting on the couch and I had like a TV dinner tray set up in front of me with my laptop and I had a glass of wine and I was like sitting in my underwear, like hanging out with my dad, watching the X-Files as I'm like making more money than most people make per hour. And I'm just like, man, like this is, and I literally like I grew up out in the woods with like AOL dial-up, right? And I just bought like a hotspot to be able to like work more remotely from my house if I don't want to go into town. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, dude, like this is ridiculous. So I just had to make that side note. It
I
made me laugh last night.
yeah, it's that's the situation we're in, and I think for people like Austin and I, and a lot of people in a similar situation, we have more ability and more freedom to come down hard on these ethical decisions than some people might. And I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to, just make sure people are aware that, we do have privilege and power that we can use.
Yeah, and it's our responsibility to use it. Like, I'm very grateful for the situation that, yeah, I've created it for myself and it's also been given to me. I don't feel bad about the quote privilege that has been generated because like it took a lot of work and it's a lot of work every day to keep up with this industry and to like keep doing this, and like my brain sometimes feels like it's fried. Like it took a lot to get here, but with great power I guess comes great responsibility, and to turn a blind eye to it's unacceptable, especially as I mean, look at any chart of anything going on right now, like the amount of money that's being printed going into the economy, into the stock market. We're zooming up like at an exponential rate, and it's like we don't start taking our responsibilities more seriously, like there might not be responsibilities to take seriously in the near future. Who knows, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it with software that's absolutely true because we're moving in a direction where software is making the decisions for our lives. And that again ties into everything we're talking about, but it's also the trajectory we're going in, which I think makes it even more important. Um,
Yeah, and that's why the framework is so important, because the rocket ship is going anyways, right? And it's like, hey, like we're probably not gonna ever get off of this, and it's gonna keep going. So it's like we need to make sure that the way we do it is gracefully with elegance in a way that is truly spreading quote good karma for our species as a whole.
yeah, that's definitely true. I think we definitely need to look at the larger picture like that. Yeah, the next thing I was going to get to is just the accuracy of data and how you deal with inaccuracy of data. I think this is something that often gets very overlooked to really bad effect. Like in our toll booth example, what if like your friend borrows your car and drives over the bridge? Now, what normally, if it wasn't a license plate reader, they would stop and pay for the toll. Now the bill is going to go to your friend. That might seem pretty whatever, like you'll just work it out with your friend, but you never know the complicated situation that might be going on. Maybe it's a couple that was together and then they're not after. Like it's a there's a lot of questions I would think about in terms of like, okay, if this data is wrong, if the bill goes to the wrong place or it read the license plate wrong or something, is there an appeal process? Is there a way people can get this fixed? If somebody doesn't pay this wrong bill, what happens? Is it going to collections, or is it going to the tax board, so the state's going to come after you and add it to your taxes? Or like what are the implications of the accuracy or inaccuracy of the data?
Yeah, exactly. And like the thing as like developers, we're creating like highly automated systems to handle like the normal cases. And if there's an inaccurate case that goes through this automation, like man, like that person it could really even ruin their life perhaps to some
Yeah.
degree, and they just get churned up by the gears of this whole thing. And if there aren't like really proper fallback channels to be able to handle these edge cases, like it can really have devastating effects. And it's also another trade-off, like how open like do you make those channels, because there are also terrible people who will abuse any open channel they can abuse, you know. So it's like we close channels to protect ourselves, but then how many people are just getting caught up in the churn of like mistakes being made through inaccuracy. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, like think about this case. What if there's a bug in your software and you accidentally read the same plate wrong every day and you read it as a different plate and you just keep billing the wrong person over and over and over again every day. And maybe they don't have much money. They don't even have a car maybe. They're just, like somehow their address got in the wrong, there could be so many issues. Like, is there something to resolve things like that? Or are they going to call them up and be like, oh, I got a bad bill? And they're like, okay, we'll take it off. And then the next day they just get it again. Like, there's so many questions I feel like there as well.
Yeah, if your number is even on the website, like try calling Google, for example. Like, good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, how easy is it to get situations like this resolved? And I know like it feels like we're really far from the nitty gritty of programming, and I get that, but like at the same time, I think it is important to think about these things. And maybe you don't have answers right away, but at least be thinking about them and be aware of them when you're working on it.
Yeah, I don't think that the point of this is to be in the nitty gritty, because it should be like these concepts, these thoughts of like, this should be a mind expanding conversation of like, man, like, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. And we need to expand like that sort of thinking into the nitty gritty. So it's like thinking you've talked about writing code as contracts, right? And you've talked about that, like how it has implications for the software itself, but then like talking about like the contracts you're writing with society through your code. And like
Mm-hmm.
that sort of high level thinking should be present uh, in the mundane.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so now we'll get to the fun part that we've been sort of looking towards this whole time, is talking about the actual software. So, let's say we're in our example here, the toll booth license plate reader, and they asked me to actually write the software to read the license plate, basically OCR them to some numbers and letters, you know, like I'm not just using some library. They actually want me to write it. And so I'm thinking, okay, what are the other uses for this software? Like, let's say some other company or some other person got a hold of this software. And you can't always predict everything, obviously. But I think it's still important to think about it, especially for something that's more specific. Like if you're talking about an operating system, that's different than, a license plate reader. Like I think it is important to say, okay, are there like really bad things somebody could do if they got a hold of this software? And I don't think the right question then is how do we prevent them from getting a hold of it, because I think that's always a losing battle. It's going to happen eventually. So I think the next question is, okay, how bad is it? Like for our license plate reader example, like if your neighbor gets a hold of the software and can just go around tracking everybody in the neighborhood all the time, like is that bad? What if another government agency wants to do it for tracking people crossing the border or something? Like I feel like there's a lot of ways it could be used, and you might think, okay, some of these are pretty bad. Do I even want this software to exist in the first place?
Yeah, it's interesting. We like, as we create software, we think about the user journey, and we have this like golden child of our ideal brand persona of like, oh, this is who we're making this software for, and it's like it's going to revolutionize this thing. But it's like, maybe we should have, like, instead of just the golden child path, we should have like the demon, like that. Like, how would a demon use our application? And then, like, you use, I think there's a concept of this where, I forget the exact name, but it's like you purposefully introduce chaos into your program, to like see how like savagely you can break it. Are you familiar with
Hmm.
the concept? What was, there's like a
Uh,
certain name for
like
it.
I think Netflix had some sort of, they called it like the monkey something. I forget what the actual name is, but yeah, I know what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
maybe we'll do an
Yeah.
episode on it after. But like, we should think about like chaotic elements and chaotic users coming into it. Like, for example, we're working with a company that we're dealing with a massive amount of abuse of promotions. That we were like, oh, we're gonna make promotions for the marketing to like really help this company, like really go to new places, and it's going to be great. And then there's like this army of people that are just like, it's like, wow, that we, no one even thought about like how that would like be such a fire to have about, until we realize that, oh, it's getting hot in here, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a really sort of gnarly topic because it's hard to get any clear answers usually. There's probably some, software like Austin had mentioned earlier, vaccination sort of tracking or whatever, what's it called, passport or whatever. That's something that, I would look at through this process. And the place that I would get hung up on is the user's data, and who is running the app, who has access to this data, what are they doing with it. I know Austin would probably get caught up in different areas, but I think the point is like, you know, should we write this software? Is it necessary? In the case of like a vaccine passport, I'm like, does it outweigh the benefits of just a paper thing? Or, like, are there other alternatives where it's not necessary to have all this data on users and make them install an app on their phone or whatever? Like, I feel like that's another question we could be asking is like, maybe there's an alternative that's better for society that just doesn't involve this software or involves it in a dramatically different way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like you said, like each person is maybe going to be looking at different parts of like what to be concerned about. But I think the point is like, even being concerned is like trying to, like, it's good to have the differences and concerns, but like actually being concerned and figuring out how to apply the concern, over just like pushing for profit.
Yeah, and I think it's even more like, in my experience, it's usually even more mundane than that. It's usually a ticket gets assigned to you and you literally don't think about it. You just go implement it. You don't go through this process. And it might even seem like an innocent feature, but you didn't go through the process. So how do you know?
Because you weren't paid to think, Thomas.
Well,
What are you gonna bill that in, like, oh well, I had to bill 3 more hours
I do.
because there were ethical implications, and they're like, excuse me,
Yeah,
you're fired.
that could
Right. No,
happen.
I think, no, I mean, that should, there should be like, just like
uh,
unit testing or end-to-end
yeah.
testing should be accounted for. There should be time accounted for broader implications, because these, like, every decision that is like thoroughly analyzed up front before you get started saves time down the road, ethically, tech debt wise, whatever. Like, more
Hmm.
time put into fleshing something out is always worth it.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think again, we're running into, this sort of situation we're talking about it is in business and in a lot of places, it's an amoral thing. And, the people making these decisions, they might, not be thinking about this, and even though, in my opinion, that's what they should be doing, like they shouldn't be assigning tasks to programmers that they haven't thought about the ethical implications of it. But the reality of the world we live in is that doesn't seem to usually happen. And so I think, I mean, somebody should do it, like we could just not do it, and the world can get worse. But like, if you can do it, you might as well.
Well, I think the trick is to like humans don't do anything unless somehow it's self-serving. Like even if it is like enlightened self like servant, like even I'm gonna go volunteer at the soup kitchen. Like you're ultimately like sure you like helping, but you're doing it mainly perhaps because it feels good to help people and it gives you meaning, which is fine. So it's like figuring out like how to incentivize like these good behaviors is really important. And that on a societal in a capitalistic society, like that is really difficult. And it's like it like comes down to like going green, like is you get kickbacks as a business for like implementing green practices. And maybe there will be some like kickback where it's like, hey, through like your societal like happiness impact or like ethical impact, you get some sort of kickback. And it's like, how would that even look like? How would that work? How could these things be incentivized where people want to do it?
Yeah, I don't know yet if I wholly agree on what motivates humans. You might be right. I'd have to do some more research, but it's an interesting theory. But I would definitely agree that you know capitalism as a framework literally has nothing in it whatsoever to encourage you know making society better, making the world better. That it's just not in the formula. So the only way that you could, in a capitalistic society, encourage this behavior is exactly like Austin said, by having, governments basically force it upon you by using incentives or taxes. I mean, that's just the world we live in, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's like at the on the same side, on the flip side of that, like more than anything, we don't want to be controlled, right? So, yeah, I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
if we'll come up with any answers in this podcast at all, but I think the questions that are being brought up are the main thing to like that we all should be questioning this right now. So, because through questioning, we can begin a dialogue. Otherwise, it's just like being told, it's just consumption versus like creating something that lasts or that does have change and impact.
Yeah. I think that was a really actually great way to sort of end things off. A great summary of what I think both of us hope everyone gets out of this. And I feel like this is something we could talk a lot more about. But if that's something people are interested in, let us know. Or But yeah,
Yeah, on that topic, yeah, please do reach out at the React Show at Owl Creek Studio or like in the Facebook, not Facebook, in the YouTube comments, in the podcast comments. Like, try to get in touch with us and let us know what drives you in your value system. Like, what would be the foundation of your framework? Like, Thomas was saying he's like more interested in the user data implications, and I was like talking about how I'm thinking about like this demon user, like using the software, like what's the unhappy path or like something. Like, what are you thinking about? Like, what did this podcast bring to your mind? And we'd love for you to add to the conversation, and maybe we'll do an ethical dilemma 2.0 podcast in the near future. So thanks for listening. Anything else, Thomas?
no, that once again, couldn't have said it better myself, Austin. It's been great having you on the show. It's been great being on the show, and yeah, I would love to hear from you. Yeah, we'll see you